Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Beatles Forever, the Beatles on this date. Let's see what stories we can find from around the date of September the 8th. And the first story comes from the Beatles Bible. Paul McCartney is awarded a French Legion of Honor award. This was on a Saturday, September the 8th, 2012. Sir Paul McCartney has been given France's highest public award, the Legion of Honor for services to music. The musician was given the honor by French President François Hollande in a ceremony at Élysée Palace in Paris. "It's such an honor to be awarded this," Sir Paul McCartney said. President Hollande praised the 70-year-old's contribution to the arts and joked that he preferred the Beatles to the Rolling Stones and that he had preferred McCartney over John Lennon when he was younger. Created by Napoleon Bonaparte in 1802 and symbolized by a red lapel thread, the Legion of Honor is normally given to French nationals. It has 3 grades: Chevalier, Officer, and Commander, and it carries a social status but no financial reward, and recipients have to buy their own medal from a licensed jeweler. The award has previously been given to the likes of Queen Elizabeth II, actors Sir Laurence Olivier, Kirk Douglas, Marlene Dietrich, and Clint Eastwood, singers Barbra Streisand, Celine Dion, and Liza Minnelli, musicians Miles Davis and Duke Ellington, and U.S. President Dwight D. Eisenhower. Afterwards, McCartney took the train to London to take part in an Africa Express show with musicians including Damon Albarn. Next, from the Beatles Bible, recording All Things Must Pass by George Harrison. This occurred on September the 8th. It was a Tuesday in 1970, and George Harrison at the studio. Trident Studios, St. Anne's Court, London. Producer George Harrison. Engineers Ken Scott and Dave Corlett. Tuesday, September the 8th, 1970, was the 34th recording session for George Harrison's third solo album, All Things Must Pass. The previous album sessions had mostly taken place at Abbey Road, which had 8-track recording equipment. Harrison wanted to add more instruments and vocals to some songs, and Trident had 16-track facilities. The album's co-producer, Phil Spector, was not present for these sessions. George Harrison said, "It took 10 or 11 of the tracks to try in the studio off Wardour Street, put them onto 16-track, because at that time, Abbey Road only had 8 tracks. And of those tracks, then we overdubbed the ones that turned into the most noisy tracks on the album, like What Is Life, Let It Down, and Awaiting on You All, and Wah Wah. All those ones that had big noise, so those tracks were done in Trident, mixed in Trident, and the others remained as just 8 tracks. The overdub sessions at Trident lasted from the 3rd to the 11th of September. And Ken Scott said, "George knew what he wanted to do. It was all these massive backing vocals, which were in the most part just him. And it was putting down a whole bunch of parts, bouncing them to a track, putting down a whole bunch of others, and just piecing together all this amazing music." Then from the Beatles Bible, also on September the 8th, we have the recording and mixing of Flying. And this was on a Friday, September the 8th, 1967, at Studio 2, EMI Studios, Abbey Road. Producer George Martin, engineer Jeff Emmerich. One of the Beatles' requirements for the Magical Mystery Tour project was the creation of enough music for the soundtrack. In addition to the songs, they also worked on several pieces of incidental music. One of these was Flying, which was recorded on this day under the working title Aerial Tour Instrumental. Flying had the distinction of being the first Beatles instrumental, wordless chanting aside, to be released, although they had recorded the unreleased Cry for a Shadow and the 12-bar original. It was also the first to be given a composing credit to all 4 Beatles. The group recorded 6 takes of Flying. The session was led by Paul McCartney and featured him on bass guitar, John Lennon on organ, George Harrison on guitar, and Ringo Starr on drums. 3 organ overdubs were then added, recorded with the tape running backwards onto the 3 remaining tracks. 2 reduction mixes were made to free up 2 extra tracks on the tape, the best of which was numbered Take 8. Lennon then overdubbed the melody on a mellotron set to the trumpet setting before all four Beatles added chants. Flying was given 4 mono mixes at the end of the session, which ran until 2:45 a.m. The rest of these mixes was selected as the best and was cut onto acetate disc for use in the film production. Interestingly, the mix contains elements later removed, including slide whistle, mellotron flutes, and the sound of a Dixieland band played on a march. This was one of the built-in mellotron tapes. This early version of Flying ended up with a sampled Yeah by Bill Franson, one of the creators of the mellotron. New mono mixes of Flying were made on September 28, 1967, along with more last-minute overdubs and edits. Next we go to Take Me Back To for September the 8th, 1968. This was the Beatles' last live TV performance. The Beatles performed their final live television appearance on The David Frost Show, featuring their hit song, Hey Jude. This performance makes a significant moment in the band's history, symbolizing their transition from live performances to studio recordings. Our next story comes from the Beatles Bible, dated September 10th, day off in Key West, Florida, and this was on a Thursday, the 10th of September, 1964. The Beatles were to have had a rest day in Jacksonville, Florida, but stayed in Key West until Hurricane Dora passed. Much of the day was spent drinking, but the Beatles also jammed at their hotel with New Orleans rhythm and blues singer Clarence Frogman Henry, plus members of their tour support acts, the Bill Black Combo and the Exciters. An open-air structure named the Beatles Hut commemorates the place where the group stayed. The Beatles' stay in Key West was later obliquely referenced in Here Today, Paul McCartney's 1982 tribute to John Lennon. What about the night we cried? Because there wasn't any reason left to keep it all inside. Paul McCartney said in The Guardian in June 2004, "We were in Key West in 1964. We were due to fly into Jacksonville in Florida and do a concert there, but we had been diverted because of a hurricane. We stayed there for a couple of days, not knowing what to do except drink. I remember drinking way too much and having one of those talking to the toilet bowl evenings. It was during that night when we all stayed up way too late and we got so, I can't say that word, that we ended up crying about, how wonderful we were and how much we loved each other, even though we never said anything. It was a good one. You never say anything like that, especially if you're a northern man." Next up from the Beatles Bible, John Lennon and Yoko Ono put Tittenhurst Park up for sale. This was on a Monday, the 10th of September, 1973. John Lennon and Yoko Ono put up their English mansion, Tittenhurst Park, on the market September the 10th, 1973. The couple had bought Tittenhurst Park in Ascot, Berkshire, on the 4th of May, 1969, for £145,000 and moved into it on 11th of August later that year. They spent twice the purchase price on renovations, including the creation of an artificial lake which they could see from their bedroom below. The couple moved to the United States in August 1971, and Lennon never returned to England. Speaking on the telephone from New York on this day, he instructed an Ascot estate agent to put the mansion on the housing market. It was sold just over a week later on September the 18th, 1973, to Lennon's former bandmate Ringo Starr. Also on this date from the Beatles Bible of September the 10th, Lennon and McCartney give him Variety Club Award, and this was on a Tuesday, 1963. The Beatles had rare days off on 9 and 10 September 1963, although John Lennon and Paul McCartney did have one engagement. They attended a luncheon of the Variety Club of Great Britain. The luncheon took place at the Savoy Hotel in London. Lennon and McCartney received the award for Top Vocal Group of the Year, a sure sign that the Beatles were rapidly becoming establishment figures. The Variety Club was the UK branch of Variety, the children's charity, which raises money for disadvantaged children. From its inception in Pittsburgh in 1927, it has had strong links with the world of show business. Next up, on September the 10th, recording of Helter Skelter. And this was on a Tuesday, 1968. Studio 2, EMI Studios, Abbey Road. Producer Chris Thomas, engineer Ken Scott. Having recorded the backing track of Helter Skelter on the previous night, the song was completed during the 7 p.m. to 3 a.m. session with a number of further overdubs. This evidently was a wild session, as chaotic in the studio as it sounded on record. The overdubs included lead and backing vocals, lead guitar George Harrison, piano heard at the end of the stereo mix, and a second drum track. Also recorded was amateurish saxophone played by John Lennon. While Paul McCartney was recording his lead vocals, Harrison ran around the studio with a flaming ashtray above his head. This likely prompted McCartney's spoken aside, audible on the multitracks but barely decipherable on the finished mixes, and a heavy northern accent. "Are you coming, son? I saw you do that, you little bugger. Pop your bloody hands on your head, come on." It occurs just after a 3-minute mark. Sorry for my dialect, I'm not sure that was close. While Paul was doing his vocal, George Harrison had set fire to an ashtray and was running around the studio with it above his head, doing an Arthur Brown. All in all, a pretty undisciplined session, you could say. And that was by Chris Thomas, and it was from the Complete Beatles Recording Sessions, Mark Lewisham. Helter Skelter was given a mono mix on the 17th of September, 1968, and stereo mixes were made on 12 October. The long gap between the two dates probably accounts for the disparities between the two versions. The mono mix omits almost a minute of the ending, including Ringo Starr's famous shout, "I've got blisters on my fingers." Next up, we have on the September the 10th date, Self-Portrait, and Mr. and Mrs. Lennon's Honeymoon by John Lennon and Yoko Ono are premiered in London. This was on a Wednesday in 1969. Film and video, John Lennon. The New Cinema Club at the Institute of Contemporary Arts in London hosted the premieres of 2 films by John Lennon and Yoko Ono on this day. The event was titled Evening with John and Yoko, and the films were Self-Portrait and Mr. and Mrs. Lennon's Honeymoon. 3 earlier films, Rape, Smile, and 2 Virgins, were also shown. Printed promotional cards were issued containing the Lennon sketch and the handwritten words, "Come and see the freak show." With films, John and Yoko's evening of film events will end towards midnight. It will happen once. It will be what they want it to be. All seats, 25/25 shillings. Following the 2 Virgins parts of the unreleased Abbey Road album were played while the film reels were changed. Hostesses distributed metal tins and wooden spoons signed by Lennon and Ono to the audience members. Prior to the following film, film number 5, or Smile, 2 people in a large white bag were led to the front and positioned by a microphone. Bells and the Hare Krishna mantra emanated from the bag, which did not, contrary to some reports, contain Lennon and Ono. During Smile, the audience has also used the tins and spoons to make a cacophony soundtrack. Self-Portrait, billed as the first audio, visual, and smell film, was a 15-minute slow-motion study of Lennon's private part becoming, I'm not going to say. It was soundtracked by Moore from Abbey Road. Unsurprisingly, Self-Portrait attracted the bulk of the limited press attention that the evening received. John and Yoko were in the cinema, and during the performance there was a door open to the left and the screen with a sharp red light directed toward the auditorium. Inquired about this, but it was later revealed Yoko had installed equipment to film the critics' reaction to John's comings and goings. The audience was to be one half of a split-screen feature, John showing his all, the critics responding to it frame by frame. Fortunately or unfortunately, Yoko's apparatus recorded nothing. Sighs of relief all around. Otherwise, that film critics circle might now be a part of a permanent installation projected on the walls of Liverpool's John Lennon's International Airport. Mr. and Mrs. Lennon's Honeymoon, a documentary about the couple's honeymoon, Bed in Peace in Amsterdam, was billed with a different title, John and Yoko Honeymoon. Directed by Peter Gossens, It was filmed in color and lasted 40 minutes, and it begins with shots from the city intercut with Lennon and Yoko singing Hair Piece, Bed Piece, followed by pieces of the couple sleeping and reading newspapers, followed by scenes of the couple sleeping and reading newspapers. The second half contains interviews and footage of Lennon talking into the camera. The event was billed with the words, "John and Yoko's evening of film events will end towards midnight. It will happen once. It will be what they want it to be." Two people sat in a white bag underneath the screen at the ICA throughout the evening, leading many to believe the couple was actually present. This was not the case, however, although the audience was filmed using infrared cameras, allowing Lennon and Yoko to watch the proceedings at a later date. In our last story, Cynthia Lennon is born. This is dated September the 10th on a Sunday, 1939. Cynthia Lennon, the first wife of John Lennon, was born on 10 September 1939. Cynthia Lillian Powell was born in Blackpool, Lancashire, the youngest of three children of Charles and Lillian. Lillian Powell was sent to Blackpool after World War II, was declared on 3 September 1939, 1 week before Cynthia's birth. They stayed in a bed and breakfast at the Blackpool seafront before moving to a 2-bedroom house in Hoylake, a middle-class town on the Wirral Peninsula where Cynthia grew up. At the age of 12, she was accepted into Liverpool's junior art school and in 1957 started as a pupil at Liverpool College of Art. It was there she met John Lennon, whom she married in 1962. They had a son, Julian, together before divorcing in 1968. Cynthia remarried 3 times to Roberto Bassanini, John Twist, and Noel Charles. She published 2 memoirs, A Twist of Lennon and John, which focused on her time with John Lennon. So that's all the Beatles on this date that I have for today. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you haven't subscribed, if you could do so, it would help the channel to grow, as well as giving it a thumbs up. It's all a great help. And if you haven't clicked on the notification bell, if you could do that, it lets you know when a video is posted. Tune in again soon for another episode of the Beatles Forever, the Beatles on this date, and I wish everybody a great day today. Thank you. Bye.